Hey guys, it's Tim coming at you with a brand new MCU video for this week and a new rendition of Learning from the Past, where I look at the previous cinematic excursions of various characters, give my thoughts and opinions on them, and state how I think that they can improve for future installments. With that said, I'm going to take a look at the previous Thor movies to see how they can improve for Thor Ragnarok. And regardless of your feelings towards the Thor movies that have come out so far, Thor and Thor the Dark World, you have to admit that the Thor movies are definitely the least popular and least critically acclaimed of the MCU movies. So let's start off like last time by looking at our main character himself, Thor. And credit where credit is due, Chris Hemsworth does a good job playing the character, making him very charismatic and likable. But the character of Thor himself lacks depth, even though he did have an arc within his first movie. However, that arc was kind of rushed towards the very end of the movie, because at the start, Thor is just brash and impulsive, but he doesn't actually improve on that in the first movie until after he fails to reobtain Mjolnir. And that was the action that bridged the second and third act of that movie, so he really kind of changed instantaneously and 2/3 of the way through the movie. To be fair though, the change did come from the shock of both not being able to reobtain his hammer, and also Loki coming down and telling him the consequences of his actions that got him exiled. So in the first movie his arc was very rushed, but in the second movie he really doesn't have much of an arc. The character is pretty much as stagnant in Thor the Dark World as he is in the Avengers movies, where he is really just there to perform actions and really doesn't have that much characterization beyond the typical Thorisms that he usually has. So my hopes for Thor Ragnarok is that they give Thor a bit more of a character arc, give him more conflict in his story to allow him to grow and change over time. Even though I like the character as he is now, I just like to see more come out of him. So let's move on from Thor himself to his supporting cast, which we can split up between two different segments, the Earth supporting cast and the Asgardian supporting cast. And, let's be honest, the thing that most people complain about in the Thor movies, while there are a few things beyond this, is primarily the Earth-based supporting cast. Now, Eric Selvig himself is an okay character. He plays the role that he needs to play. He was weird in the Dark World with them giving him the backlash to what happened in the Avengers, but overall, he's fairly inoffensive. So I'm going to focus on instead Jane Foster and Darcy. Jane Foster's main role in the story is pretty much just to be Thor's love interest, but also to give more of a grounding element to the more fantastical nature of the elements from Asgard, which really only exists in the story because Marvel didn't want to fully commit to a world of magic because they didn't think that the audience would buy into it originally. Then in the Dark World, she really is just there out of obligation, because outside of them shoving the reality gem into her to give her importance in the story, she really doesn't have that much going on besides being Thor's love interest, which honestly could be filled by other characters. Now we know for a fact that Jane isn't going to be in Thor Ragnarok, so we really don't have to worry about how her specific character will move on in the future. But I think that we need to learn from Jane in order to, if we're going to have another love interest, get a better love interest, one that has more of a tangible impact on the story beyond having a MacGuffin shoved into them, and one that's more likable than Jane, because honestly, she's an average character at best, kind of annoying at worst. And speaking of annoying characters, let's move on to who is my least favorite character in the entirety of the MCU. Darcy. Darcy's role is very indicative of the overall problems with the Earth segments in the Thor movies. She's an overall superfluous character to the entirety of the story who's really just there for the sake of comic relief. But at least for me, she's never really said anything that funny, which is really the problem with the Earth segments in the Thor movies. At least the Earth segments in the Dark World. In the original movie, the Earth segments at least serve the purpose of grounding Thor's character more in order to make him a stronger character for later. But in the Dark World, the Earth segments were really just kind of shoehorned in, seemingly out of obligation, and really served no real purpose outside of getting Jane involved in the story. And there do seem to be people who like Darcy's brand of humor, but to me, she just seems to be saying and doing stupid things, and misinterpreting or not understanding what's going on around her and acting like she does, which just gets tedious the more we have to deal with it. And Thor himself I actually find to be a funnier character than any of the comic relief that's supposedly surrounding him. So for Thor Ragnarok, if they're going to have another comic relief character in the supporting cast of characters who are going to be in it, I really want it to be someone who's on the same page as the characters participating in the story, so that the humor comes across as a lot more natural and less stilted and shoehorned in. So let's move on to the supporting cast from Asgard, who, as I'm sure a lot of people will agree, are honestly really underutilized for these characters. I honestly find myself really enjoying the Asgard segments, and I really like the characters of Lady Sif in the Warriors 3 and Heimdall, despite their limited screen time and honestly very limited roles. They're so underutilized that I'm sure a bunch of people didn't even notice that Fandral was recast between the first and second movie. So my improvement is the improvement that I was hoping that they would do in the Dark World and honestly didn't deliver on: spending more time in Asgard. Cause those are the segments of both movies that I feel really work. And I like the original Thor movie, but less so the Dark World, but I like the Asgard segments in the Dark World. So let's move on from the supporting cast to the main villain of the movies, which honestly Thor holds a very unique distinction with, where he probably has the best villain and the worst villain depending on whether you're watching the first or second movie. At least in terms of MCU quality villains. Loki is a very strong character in his own right, partially cause he had to be, cause he was going to be carried over into the Avengers. But honestly because he has the strongest connection out of any MCU villain to his hero, being Thor's brother and growing up with him. But he also has a distinct character, because he is very charming like Thor, but in a different way where he's more sly as opposed to just being sort of jovial like Thor is. And unlike other villains in the MCU, we get to see more of an arc with him, where he did have villainous tendencies prior to the start of the story, since he is the reason why they were able to get into the vault which kickstart the events of Thor. But we get to see why he is the way he is, since he was told from a very early age that he was just as qualified as Thor to become a king, but always felt like he was playing second banana to Thor in Odin's eye. And even after he starts doing all these villainous things like trying to kill Thor and trying to destroy an entire realm, you still see that he's just doing it because he wants to earn Odin's favor. He is a fully fleshed out character, and that's what I hope for from the villain of Thor Ragnarok. Because while I don't want the villain to be exactly like Loki, I want the villain to have more to them beyond the more traditional villains that you get from the MCU. Speaking of which, Malekith the Accursed. He does not have a character. He's basically just there to antagonize Thor for the entirety of the Dark World, and that's about it. Don't do that for Thor Ragnarok. And those are the things that I hope they fix and change for Thor Ragnarok. And there does seem to be some improvement coming with this one, since we haven't seen hide nor hair of any Earth elements in this movie, which is already a good sign for this movie moving forward. So what they really need to do is expand on Thor himself, expand on the Asgardian elements, and just have a stronger villain than they had last time out, more similar to what they had the first time out. But those are just my thoughts on the matter, so let us know in the comments what you guys want from Thor Ragnarok. And until next time, this has been Tim from the Hybrid Network, signing out.